Open your Bibles, if you will, to Genesis chapter 37, and we'll start there in just a moment. Genesis chapter 37. I'm really glad to be with you today. You know that there's a word we used a lot this past year. There's a lot of words in our vocabulary we didn't use until last year. One of them was essential. You hear that a lot? Essential personnel, essential businesses. It's trying to get us to realize there are some things in life that are really important, and we need to give them a high priority. Good brethren, the gospel is essential. Our time together is essential. And Jesus and the cross will and has always been essential. And I'm thankful this morning to spend this time together with you. So a lot of you I know from time past, and I'm thankful our paths have crossed. I'm glad to be able to spend a few days with you. So a lot of you I don't know. Kind of like a blind date. We're meeting each other for the first time, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to get to know you and to spend the week together with you. My wife and kids are with me this week, and my wife's parents, my in-laws, are with me today, Eric and Rhonda, and I'm so thankful that they are here. So if you didn't get to meet them, they are the better half of who I am, but I'm thankful that they were able to make the trek with me. I'm so thankful for you and what is going on here in the work at Eastland. I know about you and I know about the good things happening, and I'm thankful for your example. I'm thankful for your work. So thankful to see all the young families here today. That speaks so highly of you to bring your kids and that your families, your children are involved in the things that matter the most. So thank you for that. You all are doing such great works, and I commend you so highly. On the screen, her name is Maya Gabietta. She is a professional surfboarder. That's hard enough. It's hard enough to be a female athlete in a male-dominated sport. What makes Maya so impressive is that she surfs in Nazaré, Portugal, home to some of the biggest waves in the world, waves that will tower as high as 6 to 8 stories tall. Now, most times when you surf, I know you guys do a lot of surfing here in Louisville. I'm from Louisville, but when you surf, you get on the board and you paddle yourself out to the wave, and then you kind of get yourself up and you prop yourself up on the board. But in these waves, you have to have a professional jet ski driver, and he gets you out there on the wave, and he has to have enough skill to get you out on the wave, and then if you fall, to find you and to get to you and to pull you to the shore. I don't know which one sounds more terrifying, the actual skiing or getting up there on the wave itself. Well, 2013, Maya attempted to surf a 50-foot wave. She got up, she was on the board, she was on the wave, but the vibrations of the water broke her ankles, and she shot off that board. As soon as she hit the water, her life jacket was ripped right off of her, and that 50-foot mountain of water crashed upon her. It fractured her spine and knocked her unconscious. When her jet ski driver finally found her, he pulled her to the shore, and they immediately performed CPR to try and keep her alive, and they did. She lived, by the grace of God, taken to a hospital. But what followed was years and years and years of therapy. The next day, you would expect there to be a lot of sympathy, a lot of people expressing their care and concern for Maya, but instead, all the people that she looked up to in the sport ridiculed her. She had no business trying to attempt to surf something so big, so great, so outside of her skill set. She went through several spinal surgeries, and she herself said that she suffered with depression every day, needing medicine, counselors, and help to fight the demons that clogged her mind every day. Now, let me ask you something. You're in the shoes of someone like Maya, and you face something life-changing, something traumatic. How do you go forward from that? How do you pick up the pieces and go forward after something so horrific in your life? You know, God gave us something precious when He recorded the story of a young man named Joseph. Of all the people in God's inspired word, if there's someone who understood what it meant to go through life-changing, traumatic storms, especially at a young age, it's this young man. And one of the most amazing things about Joseph as we journey through his life is realizing that in everything he faced and everything that Satan threw at his path, not once did he quit. Not once did he turn back. Not once did he lose his faith and his commitment to his God. And I think for a people, you as well as I did, in fact, that the one common thing that happened out of last year is that every person in the world faced the same storm at the same time. We all came through a difficult year, brethren. Not one of us anticipated the events of the past 18 months, but we've come through a storm. We're on the other side of it. I want us this week, with your good permission, to walk through the story of Joseph. And I want us to find some help, some hope. I want us to find some enriching principles about how to face traumatic moments of life steadfast and faithful to our God. We're calling it 4 principles from the life of Joseph. But the thing is, we have some at home, and I'm sure there may be some here today. When you mention we're going to study Joseph, some of you may not know who Joseph is. So we got to start the story, and we got to find our young man and who he is and what makes his story so important. The story of Joseph begins with a man named Jacob, and Jacob had a problem. He liked to deceive people. He thought he was clever. He liked to trick people. And so he tricked his dad into giving him the double portion of the blessing that belonged to his older brother. He tricked his older brother into giving the better share of the father's estate. And so he really liked tricking people. Well, he meets this woman named Rachel, and he falls head over heels for her. In fact, he is so in love with this beautiful woman named Rachel that he goes to her dad and he says, I will work 7 years just so I can marry her. And he says, that's great, because that's 7 years of free labor. So Jacob works 7 years, and then comes the wedding day. And the trickster is tricked because the undercover bride is not Rachel, it is her sister Leah. The father has a plan. You're not going to marry the younger before the older. Can you imagine the next day after that wedding? He would have been very disappointed. That is not the bride he thought that it was. And so the father agrees. After a period of time, he can work and marry Rachel, and the two are married. What follows then in the story of Jacob is this endless cycle of jealousy. Jacob married to the 2 sisters, and what follows is nothing but jealousy after jealousy. And so Jacob is married to both sisters, but he loves Rachel more than the other one because he didn't really ask to marry the older one. He didn't want to marry her. Well, the Lord allows Leah to conceive, and she has 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Well, Rachel gets really jealous because she can't have kids. And so she gives her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife. And Bilhah bears 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Well, Leah sees that, and she's not been able to have kids in a long time. And so she gives her servant, see where this is going? She gives her servant to Jacob as a wife, and Zilpah bears 2 sons, Gad and Asher. And then after a shorter period of time, Leah is able to conceive again and has 2 sons, Issachar and Zebulun, and a daughter named Dinah. Finally then, after all this time, Rachel is able to conceive, and she has 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And so Joseph enters into the story into a dysfunctional home, into a mess of a family. And that's where things get dark for Joseph. There are 2 main components to Joseph's story as to why things got so difficult. And the first one, I think we miss it. I think we gloss over it. The first traumatic event in Joseph's life is the fact that he lost his mother. When Benjamin came along and Rachel was giving birth to Benjamin, there were complications in the birth, and she died giving birth to Benjamin. We estimate that Joseph was about 12 years old when Benjamin was born. So here's a young man, and he grew up his whole life without his mother. Some of you know that pain. A single parent growing up without a father or a mother in the home, and there's a real gap. There's an absence. The lack of a presence and the concern and the compassion and the nurturing that involves by having God's design of a mother and a father in the home. He knew that pain. The greater pain is the fact that all his brothers, his 10 brothers, hated him as much as anyone could hate one. And we find it right here in the context in Genesis 37, why it is the brothers hated him so much. We see right off the bat in verse 3 and 4 that he was a favorite son. In verse 3 it says, Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. He was the favorite son. There could be a lot of reasons why Jacob liked Joseph more than the other ones. Part of the reason, it could be that he's the son of Rachel, the favorite wife, and so the favorite son. But you also see in verse 4, he's a son of his old age. So all the other 10, the men are grown, the brothers are grown, but here comes Joseph as a youth. You know it like I do, dads. Today's Father's Day. There's a special connection between a dad and a daughter. There's just a bond that God made there, and it's something special. And there's a bond between mothers and sons that's just special, God-given. But oh boy, you get a boy with a dad. And then you get a dad who has grown sons, but then you place a boy into his life again. Oh, there is nothing like it, is there? The rough and fun play, the adventure, the youth, the sports, the things that you can identify with. I don't know what sports they had in Joseph's day, but you know they were watching it and engaged together. In one sense, they make you feel really young again, and then they make you feel old because you can't do it. But then they make you feel young. He brought such life to Jacob, and so he was the father's favorite. And the thing is, when you see in verse 3, was it any secret that Joseph was the father's favorite? I mean, the more obvious thing he could have done is just hung a sign around his neck that says, I like him more than any of you. A multicolored coat. I mean, he didn't buy him a nice pair of sandals, a really expensive pair of sandals. He didn't just give him money, I'm going to give you cash. He bought him a multicolored coat. You know what that means? Number one, that's a really expensive gift. To get the dyes, to be able to color that coat, that would have been really pricey. Which is Dad's way of saying, I will go to no expense to shower my love on you. But it's also a really showy gift. I mean, you could see that bad boy from a mile away. And so it's Dad's way of obviously saying, I mean, I love you all, but I obviously love him a lot more. I love him more. And I hated that. There's also the fact that Joseph gave a bad report in verse 1, where it says, 1 and 2, it says that Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned in the land of Canaan, and these are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years of age, was pasturing in the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now, there's some of you here today, you're really familiar with the story of Joseph. We've got to avoid the temptation when it comes to the story of Joseph. We know that there is no one aside from Jesus, the Son of God, that lives sinless under the earth. We know that. The problem is when we come to Joseph's story, we don't see any glaring sins. And so we inevitably begin to assign fault to Joseph because we want to see the faults. We want to make him human, and we've got to avoid that, brethren. Let the Holy Spirit reveal what he revealed. Let him show the good in Joseph and realize that he was not perfect. Because in verse 2, we might look at that and say, he's just a spoiled brat and he was a tattletale. That's not what we're supposed to see here in verse 2. Verse 2 is a contrast. Why is it Joseph could go and check on the brothers and come back and give a report? Because what you see is how rich in character and integrity this 17-year-old was compared to the moral bankruptcy of his 10 brothers. I mean, they were about as bad and rotten as you could get. 2 of them wiped out an entire town, slew every man in the town. One of them, the oldest, slept with one of his dad's wives, which would have been some of his brother's mothers. Had you put that together? There was no backbone. There was no spirituality. There was no morality to them. So in verse 2, it's not saying, here's Joseph, the spoiled know-it-all who came to tattle. What it shows is, here's a young man in the midst of a wretched home who actually did what was right and could be counted on to do what was right and could be trusted to give an honest report. And the reality is, you know this like I do, when you ought to live a certain way and you're not, and then you come along with someone who is, and maybe they're even younger than you are, it kills you. You're so jealous and angry because you know you should be that way. Joseph never gets in trouble, and it's not because he's perfect, it's just because he always does the right thing. And then there's something special. It's no question then, when you had 10 brothers who couldn't care anything about the law of God, about living moral and upstanding lives, that when God had to come and give a special dream of all the people he gave it to Joseph, even at a young age. And so in verse 5, it says, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and stood erect, and behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. His brother said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? And so they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. It's not arrogance. It's not Joseph rubbing their noses in the dirt, because this isn't like a normal dream. You've had those dreams where you stay up too late and you're eating things you shouldn't eat. You know, you got that deep dish pizza and you ate too late and you had this weird dream and you tell it to your family. That's not this. This is a God-given, providential, prophetic dream that Joseph can't escape. It's too real. It's too vivid. He had to tell it to his brothers. Don't you listen to it in verse 6? He's pleading with them. He's got to get this off his chest. He's been shown something so real, so powerful, that he has to share it with the only people who are around him. And obviously, when the message is clear, you're going to rule over us, you had all the facts, all the things on the screen. It was obvious they couldn't stand Joseph. There comes a point in our lives, and I know some of you have been there. Some of you maybe not yet, and it's going to come. There comes a point in your life when something happens, and you can look back and you can say, after that event, my life was never the same again. Have you had that event? After this event, after that tragedy, or maybe just after this life-changing situation, maybe a birth and a baby came along and our life was changed in a good way. But after this event, nothing was ever the same again. Well, that's what happens for Joseph here. Because Jacob one day sends Joseph, trustworthy, honest Joseph, to go and check on the brothers. They are out shepherding right where they had killed some men before. I'm sure Jacob's thinking, I hope I'm not going to find another crime scene. Go and check on your brothers. And so he sends Joseph to check on the brothers. And we're picking up in verse 18. When they saw him from a distance, before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Now then, come, let's kill him. Let's throw him into one of these pits, and we'll say a wild beast devoured him. Then let's see what becomes of his dreams." Remember, he's got that bright, colorful coat, remember? They can see him from a mile away. The verse 20, does that send a little chill down your spine? I know there's some bad blood. You've got siblings, you know there's times when things are rough. But to say, let's slit his throat and let's throw him in a pit and let's just say a beast ate him. How do you get there? How do you get that low? How do you get that bitter and that angry that you could care less about taking the life of someone, let alone your own brother? Well, Reuben steps up because he's made a big mess and he thinks, no, let's just save him. Because in my mind, when the brothers go over here, I'm going to rescue Joseph out of the pit and I'm going to bring him back to Dad. I know I can never be number one, but maybe I can be number two. Maybe Dad will like me a little better if I rescue the favorite son. And so they throw Joseph into a pit. There's no water in the pit. And it says in verse 24, they took him, they threw him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was not any water in it. In verse 35, how does it begin? They just threw their brother down into a pit. They didn't lower him down with ropes. They cast him down. Is he hurting? Did he break anything? Is he bloody? Well, how's verse 25 begin? Y'all hungry? Yeah, I can eat. Cold, careless, at peace with whatever harm comes to their brother. The story unfolds, as many of you know, that these traders come along and they think, well, if we're going to get rid of him, we might as well just make some money off it. So these Ishmaelite traders come along and they sell Joseph to the traders. What's amazing here is in this written context, we don't have once the question, I wonder what's going to happen to him. I wonder if we sell him to the traders, are they going to be good to him? Are they going to feed him when he's hungry? Are they going to kill him? It didn't matter. He's out of our lives. He's out of our home for good. So down in verse 30, Reuben returns to his brothers. He says, the boy's not there. As for me, where am I to go? So they took Joseph's tunic and they slaughtered a male goat and they dipped it in the tunic in the blood. And when they sent the varicolored tunic, they brought it to their father and they said, we have found this. Please examine it to see whether if it is your son's tunic or not. He examined it and he said, this is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. What happened? The deceit of the father became the deceit of the sons. Jacob's trickery, his cunningness came back to haunt him. The jealousies of the mother became the jealousies of the sons. These children, for better or worse, walked in the example of their parents. And now Joseph went from the father's favorite, blessed in the household with his colorful coat, thrown in a pit, sold to traders, sold as a slave, forced into labor, far from home, deep in Egypt. Down, 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 he sank. Joseph knows what it's like to face traumatic moments of life. In fact, it's the season of the life of Joseph that I think opens our eyes to some hard realities of life. Realities like this, like that suffering is a part of everyone's story. Every single person has a chapter of suffering in the book that we will write. It may be natural disasters, hurricanes and tornadoes or wildfires that come through and ravage our homes and destroy our properties and take lives. It could be accidents, car accidents, illnesses, sicknesses, cancers, COVID. It could be evil people who hurt and steal and curse and murder. Job said it well, that man who is born of woman is few of days and full of trouble. What Joseph shows us is that you don't have to be old to face these chapters in your lives, that even as a young person, you can face life-changing, traumatic moments under the sun. No one's going to make it from earth to home without facing suffering. Joseph shows us that we can contribute to our own suffering, because here's Jacob, and he's thinking, I am going to bless Joseph anyone else. I'm going to give him a coat. I'm going to give him a nice job. I'm going to shower on him blessings. He's thinking, I'm helping Joseph. Jacob was the one who ruined his life. Parents don't pick favorites. Jacob did that to Joseph. He contributed to the suffering of his own son. And really the boys, in a major way, the 10 sons contributed to their own suffering. I mean, that was a dysfunctional home. All sorts of different mothers, all sorts of jealousy back and forth. But they didn't have to be bitter. They didn't have to be resentful, because Joseph wasn't. Benjamin wasn't. And brethren, there are times in our life that we can make life harder for ourselves. We can make life hard for ourselves when we choose the path away from God. So when we choose to cheat rather than to study, when we choose to steal rather than to work for the things that we want to earn, to buy, to have, when we choose a moment of pleasure over a lifetime promise we have with our mate, we are living out what Paul said in Galatians 6 and verse 7. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that he will also reap. Do you know what Paul's saying here? We are free to make our own choices, but we are not free to choose the consequences of those choices. Can I say that again? I know you heard me. I want you to hear it again. We are free to make our own choices, but we are not free to choose the consequences of those choices, which means this. I can walk out the door and I can choose to walk away from God and to do whatever it is I want to do. I can choose a path of rebellion and passion and sinful living, but I'm also going to choose a path of a lot of painful consequences that come along with them. Sometimes the suffering in our lives comes because we have chosen the wrong path. We've contributed to the pain that exists in our lives. Joseph shows us that suffering can come from doing the right thing. He did not do one thing to deserve the harm from his brothers. He didn't ask for the coat. He didn't make the coat. He didn't ask for any of that pain. And we're going to see tomorrow night, when we get later on into the story, that once he gets to Egypt, he's bought by a slave. He's bought by a master as a slave. And the master's wife really likes him. And so she makes this pass at him, this attempt to commit adultery with her. And he refuses. And we look at that and we think, whoa, a 17-year-old boy, far from home, and he withstands temptation. He says no, when a lot of people would say yes. And we think, give that kid a medal. Give that kid some gold stars. He ought to be praised and promoted. And yet he's rewarded by being sent immediately down to the Egyptian dungeon, where he will be left and forgotten for nearly a decade. Sometimes, when we choose a right path, the God-honoring and the God-fearing path, rather than being rewarded, we're mistreated. And so it's the boss who says, I know things are tight and the numbers are really tight, but I need you to kind of fudge the numbers this quarter because we have to make the quota. And we say, no, we can't do that. We're going to be honest. We got to tell the truth. And he says, okay, that's fine, but you're not going to do it here. And you're fired for doing the right thing. Or you're invited to the party and they say, look, mom and dad are out of town and we're going to have a lot of fun. We have some fun drinks. We're going to have a great time. And you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go to that party. And then stories, reputations are sent and you're not invited to parties anymore. Or you're out on a date and you say, I have God-given boundaries. My parents have set up boundaries and we're not going to cross this line. We're not going to do it. So you go on the date and they push and they try and you say, we're not crossing this line. And then dates get dumped. Like sometimes you don't get asked out because you've chosen the right thing, the right path. Peter makes it clear that sometimes when we do the right thing, the God-honoring path, we suffer. We face hardship, persecution. We face pain in life, even after doing the things that honor and pleases our God. And then we might say at the end is that Joseph reminds us that sometimes things get worse before they get better. It certainly did for Joseph. Thrown in a pit, sold to traders, bought as a slave, and then thrown into an Egyptian dungeon where he is left, abandoned, and forgotten. Let's do a little math. I know it's early in the morning, but Joseph is 17 years old when we meet him, and he's thrown into a pit. By the time things finally get around again, and he stands face to Pharaoh, he is 30 years old. 17 and 30, how long was it before things finally got better again? 13 years, good brethren. 13 years before he could finally sleep at ease, before he could finally lay in his own bed, before things finally turned around in his life. You and I know sometimes things don't get better overnight. Things don't just change immediately. In fact, you know like I do, sometimes storms comes in twos or threes. Sometimes things get a lot worse before they ever get better. But I'm going to tell you something. When you read this and you read this chapter, we feel bad for Joseph. He didn't deserve any of this. And yet there's something so inspiring here. Because here's a young man who is thrown in the midst of such trauma, of such evil and pain, and he doesn't give it up. He doesn't curse his God. He doesn't blame God. He doesn't walk away from God. There was something that existed inside of Joseph that allowed him to withstand the storm and to remain faithful to his God. What he had was the spirit of long suffering. How would you define that? How would you define the word long suffering? Don't Google that. Just this right up here. How would you define that? I mean, we use words like patience, a strong patience or endurance. Some use words like well fortified, the fortified spirit. You know what catches our attention, though, when you look at the word on the screen is the latter end of the word suffering. Suffering. Long suffering is the ability to be hit again and again and again. And you don't give up. You don't walk away. You don't throw in the towel. And so even though you're hit, even though you're wounded, even though you're abused, you're still walking faithful with the king, because that's exactly what Satan does. He says, I'm going to hit him again and again and again. And if I just hit him one more time, one more temptation, he's thrown in the towel. One more. That's all it's going to take. One more test, one more storm. I know it. She's quitting. She's giving up. I've got her this time. I've got her on the ropes. One more storm, one more temptation. This is all it's going to take. Kind of like Captain America, you're hit again and again and again, and you're knocked on the ground. But you pick up that shield and you stand up and you say, I can do this all day. I can do this all day. It's Joseph who's thrown in the pit, who's sold as a slave, who's bought and mistreated and sent far from home, who's cast into an Egyptian jail, and all along the way, not once does he curse his God. Not once does he turn his back on his God. Not once does he give it up. Long suffering, simply defined, is a faith that doesn't quit. It doesn't quit. That no matter how bad it gets, I belong to King Jesus. That never changes. That no matter how dark it gets, I always have that hope. I've not lost sight of the hope. I know heaven is real. I know the promises of Jesus. I know what he says. And so no matter how dark it gets, I have that. I have the hope. I'm hanging on to the trust. That no matter how difficult it seems, how hard the storm, I'm staying true. I'm faithful with Jesus. I love the story. I don't know if it's a preacher story or a real story, but I love the story of Napoleon, who was with his armies. They were fighting in the Alps, and it turned south in the battle. And so he turned to the bugle boy and he said, boy, sound the retreat. And then there was nothing. So he turned back to the boy and he said, hey, boy, sound retreat. Our men are dying. And the boy looked up at Napoleon and he said, sir, I've forgotten the sound of retreat. He said, well, blow what you know. And so he grabbed his horn and he blew 3 times, charge, charge, charge. And supposedly the army heard the horn and they thought, help is on the way. And they ended up winning the battle. It kind of sounds like a preacher story, but the principle is rich. You know what the principle is? I've forgotten the sound of retreat. I mean, you're telling me to walk away from all this. To walk away from Jesus, to forsake my faith, to leave my family in Christ. I don't understand what that means. That thought has never entered my mind. Because no matter how bad, how deep, how dark, I will never turn my back on the King. Now let me ask you something, brethren. You see that in Joseph and everything he faced. How do you get there? How do you get that kind of a spirit that Satan can hit you again and again and again? He can cast you into pits. He can take things that mean the most to you, and you say, no matter what, I'm going to stay with Jesus. I'm going to stay true. I'm going to remain faithful to the King. How do you get there? How do we walk out of this room today? You say, I'm going to have what he has. I'm going to leave with that kind of a heart, no matter what happens. No matter if we have a repeat of 2020 or worse in the future, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying with Jesus. I want to put one passage on the screen. Sometimes all we need is just one verse, and Paul gives us one verse here in 1 Corinthians 15:58. 3 words, we're going to end right here. 3 words out of 1 Corinthians 15:58 that's going to build that spirit of long suffering in our hearts. And so it says in 1 Corinthians 15:58, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. 3 words right off the screen. Number 1 is steadfast. That talks about what you've built your life upon. Steadfast, the firm, solid, grounded rock. Remember that parable Jesus told at the end of Matthew 7? That parable of the 2 foundations, the 2 builders. The winds came, the storms blew, the floods came, and then there was one house, Jesus said. He says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like the man who built his house on the rock. Now look at that. Jesus is saying that you can build a house, you can build a life on a certain foundation that when everything hits, you don't fall, you don't crumble. You remain true. Let me ask you something today. What are you building your life on? What foundation are you building your life upon? You can build it on anything. You can build it on your wealth. You can build it on your jobs. You can build it on your family. Did you see that last year? Because I know we did. Down in Dallas. 2020 did a number on a lot of people, but 2020 did a big number on our young people. Our young people really got hit last year. Because they built a lot of the things. They built their lives on a lot of different things. Some of them have built their life on their friends, on peer approval, spending time with friends and social interactions. Some of them built their lives on social media, the followers, the likes, having as many fans as they could. Some of them built their lives on themselves, their talents, their intellect, their health, their strength. Well, what happens in a year like last year, 2020, when all of a sudden you can't see your friends face to face? In fact, you may not be able to see them face to face for the rest of the year. And what happens in a year like 2020 when all of a sudden the social media followers become social media bullies and everyone is fighting and complaining and attacking over things that really just don't matter? And what happens in a year like 2020 when at one moment you felt safe and strong and secure, but this sickness we had never even heard of is ravaging the world, and people we love are getting sick and dying? Do you know what happened? Because between the months of June and August, the suicide rate for people ages 18 to 22 skyrocketed to 59%. Why? Well, in part, because they built their lives on things they were never intended to build their lives upon. Brother, when you build your life on anything other than Jesus, when you build it on your wealth, when you build it on your work, when you build it on your career, when you build it on anything under the sun, and those winds blow, and they will blow, that life will come crashing down. It is only a life that is built on Christ that will stand, that will sustain you. Joseph, before he ever was sent to the pit, had his life built on God because he knew who his God was and he knew who he was. And so that's the point. We may be in a good season year. Things are behind us and we're moving forward. But this is a season to build our life on the rock. I know who I am. And I know who he is. And I know who I am in him. I am his and I'm his child. And I know that God is good. And I know right from wrong because I know his word. And I know that heaven exists. And I know my hope. I am standing on this rock that never changes, so that when everything else changes, when everything else falls apart, I still have this solid truth that never changes, that never crumbles. Steadfast. And he says, I'm immovable. That speaks to our resolve, to our commitment, to our dedication to the King. I'm not lured, I'm not swayed, I can't be bought, I can't be moved. It's kind of like what Psalm 1 said, like that song we sing. Anchored in Jehovah, I shall not be moved. Like that tree that's firmly planted by the water. You could throw him into a pit, you could sell him off as a slave, but you can't force Joseph to turn his back on his God. And that's the idea. I'm all in. I'm all in with Jesus. The rock is there. The foundation of God and His Word and His promises and His character is there. But it's me digging down my roots deep and to that rock and to those promises and saying, I'm not moving. And so when Satan comes and he brings the luring, tempting, good things of the world and he says, yeah, I know that. I get you're saying you're not leaving. But you can have a lot of fun if you just compromise on your character. You would have all the things you would need in your work. You would climb the corporate ladder and have more money than you can ever imagine if you just gave up your weekends and gave up your time at home. If you would just move off that rock, you would have everything you would ever want. And we say, Satan, nothing you could offer me compares to what I have in God. I will not be moved. And he says, fine. Fine. If I can't lure you, if I can't buy you, then I'm going to blow you off that rock. I'm going to take everything you have. I'm going to take your job, and I'm going to take your wealth, and I'm going to take your friends. I'm going to sow havoc within the church. I'm going to take your family. I'm going to take your health. I'm going to take everything that means the most to you. But to have the spirit that says, even then, even if you brought the worst, I'm still not going to move. My life is rooted in the rock. Can you say that today? Satan, bring it. Bring it. The worst you could possibly throw. The most enticing you could possibly offer. It simply doesn't matter. My life is planted. My life is rooted. I stand on the rock no matter what. No matter what. I'm all in with King Jesus. In fact, the only place I am moving, that Paul says here in our context, is that I'm going upward, onward, forward, abounding. Because Joseph did grow. He didn't grow bitter. He didn't grow resentful. He didn't grow atheistic. But he grew, as we will find him on Wednesday, a more seasoned, mature believer. And a greater place in his faith than ever was before. And if we're going to grow, good brethren, if we're going to come out of this season, it's not lesser. It's not weaker. It's saying, you might disrupt our services. You might throw havoc into the world and into this country, but you can't steal my song. But you can't distract my focus. But you won't rob me of my worship, because on the first day of the week, I'm assembled and I'm giving my praise to the King. And Monday through Saturday, wherever I am, my heart and my mind and my life is focused on the King. I'm onward. I'm upward. I'm abounding. I'm heading in a direction and I'm going home. We call that homeward bound, heaven bound. I'm going anywhere. I'm just going forward. Remember Maya? Our surfer Maya? It really would have been easy to give it up. And I think everyone anticipated her to. Just to hang up the board and to do something else with her life. But in February of 2020, this past year, Maya got back up on the board, back in Nazaré, Portugal, and she set the world record for the highest wave surfed, 73 feet high, 13 feet higher than the one that she crashed on. You are going to have pits in your life. You're going to face some times when you're cast and abandoned in the pits in Egypt. And Satan would love nothing more for you just to walk away. To give it up. Turn your back and quit. Blame God for the storms. Curse God for the rain. But brethren, what you see in Joseph is a faith that doesn't quit. You can cast me in the pit. You can sell me as a slave. But you can't take my heart from my God. Can we leave here saying that today? No matter how bad it gets, no matter how dark it becomes, I'm standing with the King. I have a faith that will never quit. And maybe today you haven't even started that journey, and today's the day to do so. You've not given your life to God, and today is the day to begin that journey, to begin that step. If you are here this morning and you've not been baptized, that is the beginning step, to turn from your sins, to confess Jesus as your Lord, and to put Him on in baptism, be adopted into His family, and to leave here confident you are heaven-bound. But maybe you're here, and you've come this morning, and God bless you for being here, and you find yourself in a pit. Things in your life are not in a good place. You feel discouraged and beaten up, but some things in life that's going on, and we'd love to help you. Don't you give up. Don't you dare quit. Your God is here for you. He gave His Son for you, and you've come to a good place at a good time. The family of believers here is here willing to help you and to pray for you and to comfort you so that you leave here rededicated, recommitted, and ready to continue on, onward, upward, and heavenward. What can we do to help you today? If we can help you, if we can pray for you, if we can comfort you, right here's where you need to be. Let's do it right now. Let's stand. Let's sing.